All right, hi guys. My name is Suryansh Basamalek, and we're on to the final round of the Floor is Yours debate. And before we move on to the participants, we will be introducing our guest judges. We have with us Yashrup Dey and Shumi Chatterjee. Yashrup is currently a freelance an academic filmmaker. He has been into debating for a long time since 2015, and is one of the most one of the and both of them are in fact some of the more well-known debaters in the debating circuit. And Yashrup himself has also trained some of debaters who have gone on to winning national championships. And Shomi too has a lot of awards under her name as well. She along with Yashrup has won a lot of inter-college debates. And has been the best speaker along with Yashrup in several other debates. So it's a pleasure to have you both, Yashrup and Shumi. Thank you for coming. And to introduce our participants in the final round, we have in this speaking order, we have the dialect duo, Z speakers, the losers, and not applicable. The dialect duo are represented by Anirudh Chaudhary and Arav, they are represented by Gaurav Rampuria and Achintya Nevatia. The Z speakers are represented by Praneeth Sinha and Dityaraj Paul. Praneeth stepped in late in for the previous Aditya Raj's previous teammate Reed Gupta, who cannot be here with us because he has fallen very ill. Our best wishes to him. And the losers are represented by Devam Sarkar and Ayush Gupta, and the team of not applicable are represented by Dhruv Saraf and Abhay Tulsian. Thank you guys for joining in, and we will be beginning with, of course, the dialect duo. I would request them to please recognize their proposition speaker and their opposition speaker.
Right. So I'm the proposition speaker, Gaurav, and Achintya is the opposition speaker.
Right. So Gaurav, as we've had for the past few debates, you have 4 minutes to make your speech. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm clearly audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
The floor is yours. Yeah.
Right. So I'll start with a simple quote. If you can't feed 100 people, then just feed one. Mother Teresa. A very good evening to all members of the House. As the first speaker of the proposition, I firmly believe in the motion that this House believes that in areas of extreme starvation, the choice to not share food by those who have a lot will be deemed a criminal offense. And I'll explain you why you should believe the same too. So, firstly, ladies and gentlemen, it is important for us to understand just how fundamental food is for existence. And this can be further illustrated by the fact that the provision of food is a directive principle in India, which the center and the state governments are expected to abide by. Now, in the right to food, it is in the right to food, it is clearly mentioned that food is a human right and its provision to all in sufficient quantities is necessary. However, 1 in 9 people do not get enough food to be healthy and lead an active life. Hunger and malnutrition are the biggest risks to health worldwide, greater than AIDS, greater than malaria, greater than tuberculosis, and greater than all three of them even combined. And this just shows that a good percentage of the society in today's age is not getting access to the food resources. Now, instead of looking at the situation from the eyes of a privileged teenager who has all the luxuries of the life, look at it from the eyes of a person living in areas of extreme starvation, like the sub-Saharan Africa region or Yemen. And you will understand how many people have to struggle to even get the next meal ready. Then only can we realize just how important food is for us. Now, let us look at some important terms in the motion. Firstly, extreme starvation, which simply refers to situations where people are usually not, where people suffer from the serious lack of food. Next, the motion mentions the word lot, and just to clear it up and prevent any further ambiguity from taking place, here lot refers to the people who have food resources which is much more than the average level, and have the capability to share these food resources with others in dire need. Now, the last term is criminal offense, which is basically an offense against the state. Now, this is very important because when we look at areas of extreme starvation, these are usually areas where policies of the government have failed to provide people with the sufficient food requirements. And now understand that to deal with such crisis situations, we need to provide people with food. And this can be done when the more privileged people who have more food resources than others are ready to share their food with others. And in order to incentivize the sharing of food, we need a law, which we need a law, so that during these situations of extreme starvation, that it will be a criminal offense if a person who has a lot of food resources does not share these food resources with others in need. Otherwise, people will not be willing to share whatever food resources they have with others under most circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, understand we have reached this position in society because we have shared resources with others, because we have helped each other, because we have learned to coexist with each other, and that is why we are social beings. And therefore, it is imperative that in such terrible situations, we share our resources with others. In conclusion, by making it a criminal offense, it a criminal offense that if one doesn't share food with others in situations of extreme starvation, we can effectively incentivize proper sharing of food. And I'll like to end with a quote. If a human is not humane enough to share resources and to share food with others in need, then why must we consider him to be a human? Thank you.
With a pinpoint ending to your speech, thank you, Gaurav. A very well structured speech to begin the case of the proposition. And we would now move on to his teammate, Achintya. Achintya, are you with us?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are. So, beginning the case for the opposition, Achintya, you have the floor.
Yeah. So the motion states that the House believes that in areas of extreme starvation, the choice to not share food by those who are allowed will be deemed a criminal offense. And I seek to convince you otherwise for a motion which is absolutely baseless. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me point you something that proposition will never bring to the table because, of course, they want to hide what the motion has absolutely failed to underline here. There is a very inconsistency in the wording of the motion. When it says share food and then says the government can make laws to deem it a criminal offense not to share food. Firstly, how many sharing will be deemed as proper sharing in the eyes of laws? If I share food with one person while another shares food with 100 people, is that equal? Well, according to the motion, yes. There has been no margin set for who will share according to the quote unquote law stated in the motion here. Point being that do we really want to support a motion which has grossly failed to define the above aspects? Now, next, sharing is a value of choice and is not forced, and the motion completely denies the meaning and the essence of the word here. Now, the proposition here will take the House on an emotional ride as their way to the motion to prove their flimsy points, but it is absolutely incorrect. Why? Because the crisis is to be solved by logic and not emotions. Extreme starvations causes are job instability, political tension, and economic tension. And in that case, the government wants to ask people to quote unquote share their food. Let's understand that the crisis affects all sections of the society. The rich or the people who have a lot have limited and finite resources, and the resources will eventually come to an end as well in a crisis situation. Aristotle once said that the resources of the few are at the hands of the many, and the many decided how the resources will be distributed. It will, in a single statement, be morally incorrect for many people, to be taking the commodities of the few. The few people are the ones who have worked hard to accumulate the resources. Why? Because when the time of crisis comes, it will be useful to them. In the hypothetical situation, if the motion's dictations are implemented, despite all its fallacies, people still wouldn't share their resources in a time of crisis. Why? Because the fundamental human ideology or the mindset is to preserve resources. And what's the wrong with that? Because they have accumulated them and they use it for their own. So basically, in the eyes of the proposition, everyone's a deemed criminal, which is nothing but a government, is nothing but what the government wants as a cherry on the top when they're dealing with another crisis. Criminal offense, as defined by the first speaker of proposition, is a violation against state laws. But they don't understand the fact that the law itself in motion here is flimsy and baseless. Next comes the question, the inefficiency of the government, which is the highlight here. And they want to make a law which will further destabilize the government. The right to food is guaranteed by the government, and it is not the duty of the people to ensure it. Why not the use of other international nations to help them come out of the crisis rather than burdening a section of the society who they think have a lot? I can present another legal, dare I say, perspective as well. Food, in essence, is a commodity bought by money. Money in a capitalist society or any society like the and in capitalism, I may take the example of United States itself, is a private property that cannot be taken by the government on their whims and fancies, and the government cannot apply laws on such things. If the proposition was to give absolute power to the state by regulating what amount of commodities an individual has, they are very well setting the precedent that they will come to the table tomorrow and say that the government has to decide, right to decide where a person goes or he lives. My points have proven to you one fact: the inevitability of more crises in the country if we adapt to this baseless motion. My question to the House in conclusion here is that would they enable the country to fight with one crisis, or implement a baseless law which is a proposition stance and hence lead to multiple crises in a country which will result in the downfall of the nation? Thank you.
Again, ending right on time. Thank you, Chinthia, and that wraps up the speeches for the
You guys,
dialogue.
1 second. I had a question. When do the rebuttals happen?
It happens right after each duo ends, Yashrup, which is
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. I thought it's after each speaker. It's fine.
okay. So we'll first take one question to Praneeth and one question to Gaurav, and then move on to Achintya. So we'll to the proposition. We'll first take a question from Dhruv Sara.
So, considering that things such as progressive taxing, which essentially taxes the rich enough to make the government basically capable enough to give food to the poor, why do you want to make such a radical change in deeming it a criminal offense not to share the resources?
Right. So I think I clarified that in my speech that in situations of extreme starvation, the main incentive, the main mindset of the rich people who have a lot of resources is to keep the resources with themselves, and therefore the resources not being able to reach the poorer section of society who don't have these resources. And therefore, if we introduce such a law, then it will incentivize the people, because this is one of the most effective ways by which we are ensuring that the people who have a lot of food resources, we are incentivizing them to share the food resources with others, with the poorer sections.
Right, fair enough. Thank you, Gaurav. Yashrup or Shomi, do either of you have a question to Gaurav? Right. That in mind, we'll now be taking questions to one question.
Sir, I had a question to the proposition speaker, sir. Is that
Uh,
prevented?
as I mentioned earlier, Devam, for today we have one question to each speaker and
Oh, all right, all
a
right.
question from the judges if
Thanks.
you want to ask one. That in mind, are there any questions to Aditya, the opposition speaker? Right. Praneeth, your question.
Thank you for your speech, sir. Considering that a large part of your speech was defending the fact that it's not proper sharing, why do you think it's essential that this needs to be a question of whether the rich are sharing out of the goodness of their hearts or by some government mandate? Why is that important to your argument?
So, firstly, sharing by definition is a value which is not forced. It's rather a value of choice where I decide whether I want to share my food or not. And the way in the government, I have proved it to just highlight the inconsistency in the motion when it says that the government make a law and then deem it as sharing, because that's absolutely contradicting each other. Because sharing is a value of choice and it cannot be forced by the government.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you, Achintya, and thank you for the question, Praneeth. I hope you got your answer. Shomi or Yashurup, do either of you have a question?
No, I don't have a question, but just a little something. Just refrain from typing or like debating or doing anything at all in the chat box. And once your turn for speaking or asking a question is over, just don't say anything, don't type anything, don't do anything at all.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you, Shomi. I hope all the speakers here can keep that in mind. Thank you to the dialect duo. We will now be moving forward to the second team, which is Z speakers, represented by both Pranit Sinha and Aditya Raj Paul. Please recognize your proposition and opposition speaker.
And I'll be speaking.
You'll be speaking? We couldn't hear you.
I'll be speaking for the proposition and Aditya Raj for the opposition.
Right. Fair enough. Then Praneeth, for the next 4 minutes, the floor is yours.
Right. The ends may justify the means so long as there is something which justifies the ends. Leon Trotsky. And on that note, let me begin by asserting a very simple fact, a very justifiable ends, the fact that people should not die. And on that, how will I go about asserting this? By proving to you that it is necessary to have some sort of distributive effort from the wealthier or the well-off people in a fractured society in order to ensure that there is no death from starvation. Now, firstly, we're talking about areas like Yemen, Central African Republic, Liberia, Haiti, etc. These are areas with high levels of political instability, conflict, high levels of conflict, and they're marked by a lack of an enormous absence of economic opportunity and institutional failures at scale. Now, in such a system, in such a society, it becomes nearly impossible for individuals to ensure the means to actually get to provide food for themselves or for their households. And as such, it should also be noted that there is inequality within this group too. Hunger is gendered because you have so many women reliant on male breadwinners in these societies. You may have further division on racial or sectarian lines, etc. And so what we see is a widespread institutional hopelessness for the starving to actually ensure any access to nutrition or sustenance. Secondly, common sense suggests that Engel's law, which says that the poorer the country, the greater the percentage of an individual's income will be spent on food, is true, and data suggests this too. I'm citing the American Journal of Agricultural Economics. Thus, in such a society, even if you have the means to attain food for yourself, you still don't have enough income to access medicine or other necessities like shelter, etc. Thus, the fight for survival becomes a very tough one, even once you get past the barrier to accessing food. Having proved that this distribution is necessary for survival, which should be the bare minimum that this house targets to do, I will also provide a constructive asserting why this why having enough food qualifies you to be seen as having enough capital to be accountable to those government laws which state you must share your food. The opposition speaker suggested that the motion is ill-defined, that these laws are ill-defined. However, that's not the motion's fault. That's a legislative matter, right? We can define the parameter for what food as as your store goes down, you have enough to access food for it. That's a parametrical issue, right? We don't have to debate on those semantics here. What we do have to recognize is the fact that in these societies like Yemen, characterized by high food insecurity, where if you don't have any food at all, you have enough to have a large amount of coercive power over the individuals around you. We have to understand that in these societies, this economic inequality is very dangerous for a fledgling democracy, for an early stage economy. It's very dangerous because it allows a sort of hierarchy to arise in an economy from its very birth, right? The opposition speaker suggested that individuals worked hard for their food. We suggest otherwise. These are areas where you can clearly see that if you're rich, there's a very high chance you got there by exploiting colonial conditions or imperialistic conditions, or through simple political means, right? So, and thus we assert that this kind of inequality is not desirable in such a society. And yeah, I'd like to end my speech.
Well, ending right on time once again, surprisingly, Praneeth. Thank you for your speech. With that in mind, we will now be moving forward to the opposition speaker for this debate in their team, which is Aditya Raj Paul. Aditya, are you with us?
Yeah. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are both audible and visible, Aditya. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, the floor is yours.
Well, a very good evening to one and all present here. The motion under the hammer reads, the House believes in areas of extreme starvation, the choice to not share food by people who have a lot will be deemed a criminal offense. And being a member of side position, it's my utmost prerogative to make you to prove how baseless and impractical the motion is. Well, first and foremost, when we talk about areas of situation, you must understand the people of that area are fighting for survival. And in almost every case, the people, it's always every man for himself. And I would like the members of the House to acknowledge that in most of the cases, like the speakers before me have mentioned, in cases like in Haiti, Yemen, or Sub-Saharan Africa, the crisis is actually extremely prolonged and with a lot of uncertainty in mind. So even the people who might have a lot of food now may not have a lot of food in times to come, maybe in 1 week or 1 month, or even after 3-4 months. So in such a situation, it is not extremely desirable for the person or their family to share food while jeopardizing the health and medical facilities of their own family. So, and then I would like to say that if I would like the members of side proposition may even bring a very humanitarian aspect into asking why should we not spare or even give food to the needy. Well, to that I would like to say that if you live in a very utopian world, I will not entertain this motion. And I would like to further say that even if we consider a situation where in a country where it is in such cases where it is deemed a criminal offense for to not share food is deemed a criminal offense, what would exactly happen? So we must all understand that the places which already have extreme starvation, they do not have a very stable government, and they don't have enough resources to even provide the bare minimum of food to their people. So how can you expect a government to even pour the resources into building a judicial system in order to investigate and even distribute food which already did not, or to make such a cause even logical? So what would happen is what has always happened. So ladies and gentlemen, we all know the ills and effect of bureaucracies even in the most advanced countries. So what will happen is that the rich will always buy their way out and they will have their own way. So in this way, the people who are actually in need will never have what they deserve or the main intention or the purpose of making it a criminal offense, but it will only pour more money into the pockets of the bureaucrats. So, and thereby wasting resources into building a very useless system which otherwise could have been used for feeding the hungry. Well, hereby I rest my case, but not my stance. Thank you.
Right, fair enough. Aditya, you have a minute to go. Would you like to continue or wrap up?
Wrap up.
All right, fair enough. Keeping it short and simple. Thank you, Aditya Raj, and that wraps up both the speeches from Z speakers. We will now be taking one question to their proposition speaker, and then we will move on to their opposition speaker. Achintya, is that a question? Right,
Yeah,
Achintya.
yeah, yeah. So the proposition speaker told that we are not about debating how the motion is contradictory or about the nature of sharing and etc. So I want to ask, means if a motion which is faulty in meaning and contradictory at its core, how would it lead to proper legislation and benefit the country rather than damaging it? Because my perception is that it would rather lead to improper legislation because of a core motion which is contradictory in nature.
Keep it short from next time, Achintya.
Yes, sure. Sorry.
Pranit, go ahead.
Yeah, so firstly, I'd like to state that my point that it's unnecessary to deal with those semantics was in my question to you and not in the contents of my speech. Furthermore, I'd like to thank you for stating that it's your perception that the nature is contradictory. I believe that sharing has a very simple definition in the English language. It means to give something that you have to another person, and I don't believe that the issue of consent is very important here because of the simple fact that when people, whether or not what possible intentions could you have for keeping that food for yourself? The law would state some sort of parameter for what counts as having enough food, right? And if you're going to run out of food very soon, law would ensure that that doesn't count as you having enough. When you have enough food, then you should have the moral obligation to share that. And so I don't see any sort of contradictory or ill-worded legislature coming out of this motion.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you, Praneeth. And I hope you got the answer to the question, Cynthia. Yasharoop or Shomir, do either if you have a question to Praneeth? Fair enough. We will now be taking questions towards the opposition speaker. Gaurav, go ahead.
Right. So the opposition speaker mentioned how in areas of extreme starvation, there's not a stable form of government, and the rich people, they have a one for themselves policy wherein they want to look after their own needs. So are you suggesting the fact that the people who are poor and who do not have food resources should be left on their own to survive in such conditions? Because neither the government can provide them with resources, and you are suggesting that the rich people should also not provide them with resources.
Well, first and foremost, I would like to say that in such cases where there's extreme starvation, everyone is suffering more or less. It's not as if the more privileged are having delicacies after delicacies. even they are storing resources for the unpredictable future. And if in such a case they do not if they might feel that they might not have food in the time to come, so if you're asking the more privileged to actually jeopardize their life in order to save someone else, this is very illogical and extremely utopian to ask.
Fair enough. Thank you, Dityaraj. I hope that answers your question. And Yashurup or Shomi, do either if you have a question to Dityaraj? Fair enough. That in mind, we will now be moving forward to the third team in this debate, who call themselves the losers, represented by Devam Sarkar and Ayush Gupta. Do recognize your proposition and opposition speaker.
Sir, I'll be the proposition speaker.
Fair enough. That in mind, Devam, you have 4 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours.
So, hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Devam Sarkar. I'll be proposing this particular motion at hand. Now, firstly, let's look at this agenda in a very different manner here. Ladies and gentlemen, the population of India is 1.33 billion, and the population of United States is 308 million. However, ladies and gentlemen, US contributes to 16 metric tons of carbon emissions, and India contributes to 1% of the carbon emissions. Now, do you really think the real cause of climate change is still overpopulation? No, ladies and gentlemen, the real cause of climate change is overconsumption. Understand that the capitalist stakeholders have been using overpopulation as the issue, and without realizing that it's actually the overconsumption part which is contributing to this to climate change. Now, let me emphasize on the first part of the agenda here, that is in areas of extreme starvation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, tell me one thing: where do you think there are? When do you call a place an area of extreme starvation? One, when there are a lot of people, so you run out of resources. However, as I said, the real problem is overconsumption. And the second is something which has not been addressed by any debater. That is the poor resource allocation by the government itself. Ladies and gentlemen, let us understand a very simple thing here. When a government says that in a parliament we have 5 seats and there are more than 6 people competing for it, what I'm trying to say is, instead of cutting down on the number of people, what you should do is increase the number of seats. Now understand that a lot of people might say that a rich person is already contributing to the state by giving more taxes. However, understand that if there is already poor resource allocation by the government, just paying taxes won't help. Now, let me come to another very important point here. Now, why do you think the agenda says food particularly? Because understand that food is a very basic necessity. It's needed for the survival of life. Now, this brings me to my last and a very important point. That is the eternal debate of necessity versus luxury. Understand that when the motion says that a lot, right? A lot of food consumption. Understand, a lot is subjective here. If a rich person wants to have a rich person can still have a lot of food to satisfy himself. This motion no way demeans this motion particularly does not mean that a rich person would have less. He would have the amount that is needed for his particular satisfaction. He would still have what is needed to live. However, what this motion particularly targets is the fact that you should not go to the extent of luxury, right? Because in this particular scenario, if you waste food, if you buy expensive food, that is when we see that the poor people are not able to have what it is needed. Right now, with that said, I would like to contribute. I would obviously like to contribute by stating in Karl Marx's words. Obviously, because this particular debate won't end if I do not bring in Mr. Karl Marx here, that sharing profit does not always mean that you go into loss. It's called profit for a reason. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case, but certainly not my stance. Thank you.
Well, after a quote from Karl Marx, thank you, Devam Sarkar. We will now move on to your teammate from the opposition, Ayush Gupta, and we will see how he follows up with that. Follows up your act. Ayush, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Right. So The motion in front of us is very specific, right? So I would like to begin by defining a criminal offense. And as stated by the first proposition speaker, a criminal offense would be an offense against the state. Now, understand what would be an area of extreme starvation that could be considered to be a nation state, any nation state with a purchasing power parity or income level of less than $1 a day, and what would be considered a lot in this context, right? So understand the context itself, right? A lot would be a relative term, and in an area of overall extreme starvation, it would still be the bare minimum. Now, again, the core of human nature is fixed and given. It's fashioned by biological and genetic factors, right? So in this context, we again have to understand the influence of education and social factors, or the lack of it, that impact its premise, right? So in in a situation like this, your instinct would prevail over your intellect, because it's a situation where people are struggling for their survival, right? And not understanding that would be extremely pretentious and patronizing of us as relatively privileged individuals, like the first proposition speaker itself stated. Now, human beings are extremely malignant in their actions and essentially self-seeking, but we cannot consider that to be a negative thing in this context or in an area of extreme starvation. Now, humans are not rational in a sense of fear and aversions. And while the mentality of survival of the fittest is definitely beyond us, we must understand that allowing the state to exercise power in such a situation is indubitably a worse outcome. Now, we must understand that while it's all well and good to say that universal civil liberties should apply to each and every nation state in this context, a romantic proposition like this would often have no basis in reality. And while it's clear that the idea of human rights advances the notion that there is such thing as common humanity and individual expression, it is irrefutable that the state shouldn't be given this sort of power to force an individual to involuntarily provide their earned resources to another individual, especially in an area of extreme starvation, where any sort of pooling of resources might still be ineffective because it will not leave enough for both individuals. And again, like the first proposition speaker stated, to counter that, it is involuntary because it isn't an incentive. It could even be considered a method of inflicting fear, right? And under the concept of the poverty cycle itself, which makes poverty self-perpetuating through its wider impact of health and civic order, etc. It is unjust of the state to further punish individuals who are in a very dire situation, as implied by the motion, and it's unjustified under the International Convent of Civil and Political Rights, which states freedom from arbitrary arrest as a human right. And again, so like the last, to counter that, the misallocation of resources by the government is not grounds or does not provide grounds or any sort of justification for charging someone on a criminal offense that infringes on their basic right. And with that statement, I'd like to rest my case, but not my stance.
With that, thank you, Ayush. That was both the speeches made by the losers, or so they say. We will now be taking questions towards first the proposition speaker Devam and then move on to Ayush. We will first take a question from Aditya Raj to Devam. Oh, I apologize. Ave, is that a question?
So my question is for the opposition.
Right. Aditya Raj, go ahead.
So, sir, since we have talked about a lot of legal terms and definitions in your speech, you have also talked about luxuries. So, do you realize that in places like Haiti or Yemen, there aren't any luxuries as defined by any book of economics? They have the bare minimum sustenance, and even the more privileged, they are not having delicacies like pizzas and burgers. So, how do you justify your statement?
Sir, I think again, what you said was. Sorry.
All right. For the proposition speaker, yeah, all right. So, sir, firstly, understand that again, the word luxury itself is relative. In the terms of luxury, what I meant to say was the average economy is someone who is consuming more, someone who is consuming expensive food. That is what I consider as luxury, right? When understand that when a certain person is consuming more than he needs or is rather wasting food, that is what I consider luxury. Even in an average economy, in a downgrade economy, or in an economy where a large percentage of population is below the poverty line, understand that there still lies a huge or a drastic difference between someone who is rich and someone who is poor. And that gap or that vacuum is what I wanted to address when I said luxury. Thank you, sir. I hope you're answered.
Thank you.
Right. Hopefully it is answered, Devam. Thank you for the question, Dityaraj. Yashurup or Shomi, do either of you have a question? Fair enough. We will now take a question to Ayush, the opposition speaker. We will take the question from Ave.
Thank you. Sir, you stated that through the application of this law, the freedom from arbitrary arrest would be violated. Considering the fact that arrest for the violation of this law would be arrest for violation of a law codified in the penal code of that country, how on earth would it be arbitrary in any way?
Right. So I believe that my entire speech was definitely revolved around that certain point itself, and how how it's unjustified, and how I don't agree with the premise of the motion. And so while I believe that my entire speech was around that fact itself, uh, and how the identity of common humanity and individual expression would not uh, be that relevant in a scenario where it's where every or there's overall where there would be overall extreme starvation. It's not justified.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ayush. Yashurup or Shomi, again, do either of you have a question? Fair enough. With that in mind, we have come to the end of the questions to the third team of the debate, and we will now move on to the fourth and the last team for the finals, which is the team of not applicable, represented by both Dhruv Saraf and Ave Tulsian. Keeping that in mind, I request both speakers to identify the opposition and the proposition speaker.
I'll be speaking on behalf of the proposition, and Dhruv will be going as part of the opposition.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ave. And like the others, you will have 4 minutes for your speech. Are you ready?
Yes. May I begin?
Yes. Yes.
Will you notify me when 2 minutes are over and 1 minute is?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Thank you. All right. May I begin?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate has boiled down to a very, very simple question. And it's an age-old question which is debated over and over again. Which is more important? The right to private property or personal property, or the right to life? And the proposition today stands in favor of the right to life. Because the most basic right which is guaranteed to every citizen of every nation is the right to live. It is the right to live, to breathe, and to go about their lives. Right to private property, irrespective of it being a very, very important right, of course, it is certainly not something which we can put above the right to life. Therefore, since the right to life outweighs the right to private property, because you can't have private property if you don't have a life, if you don't live, then this debate completely stands in favor of the proposition. Why? Because when someone has a lot of food, which means more food than they're going to need for the considerable or prospective future, then the people around them in areas of starvation, in areas of extreme starvation, the people who do not have any food, those people are going to be dying. Why? Not because of a lack of food in that area, because of a lack of access to food. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that those people are dying not just because that area has a lack of food. They're dying because of the conscious decision which is made by the person who has a significant amount of food, an amount of food which, by the way, will be lasting them for more than the prospective future. This is the conscious decision made, the conscious decision made by them to not share that food with people who they know are going to die as a result of it. Now, I'd like to refute a lot of the points which have been brought up by the opposition today. Firstly, right at the outset of this debate, and again in the third speech made by the opposition, they spoke about how this motion is vague and how it doesn't address how much sharing needs to be done and who has a responsibility to share. So very simply, today is a debate on the very premise and basis of the motion. Getting into the exact semantics is something which needs to be done by the legislature, needs to to be done when the law is being codified, because it is absolutely impossible to introduce every single criterion within the context of a debating motion. That very idea is illogical. Additionally, the first speaker stated that the rich have finite resources which will eventually come to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, in areas of extreme starvation, the poor have no resources, and since their right to life clearly outweighs a person's right to the rich person's right to private property, the rich person should be compelled to provide or share some of that food with the poor people or the people who do not have access to that food. Additionally, he stated that why don't we use international organizations as well as other nations to come in? Ladies and gentlemen, places like Yemen and places like Somalia, there is extreme starvation and there's so much political instability that even though the United Nations and a bunch of nations want to intervene, it is impossible for them to carry out to carry out the logistics required to properly deliver food to everyone, and therefore the citizens have a responsibility to act. He also stated that it is the duty of the government to ensure the right to food, and it is not the duty of the people. Ladies and gentlemen, the government often ensures people's rights through making laws which are enforced on others. How does the government ensure the safety and security of the people? By making laws which stop other people from harming each other. Additionally, the opposition said that the freedom from arbitrary arrest should be violated, which again is completely irrelevant in this scenario, because the freedom from arbitrary arrest refers to when someone is being arrested even though they're not violating any law specifically, and therefore that point is again irrelevant. And the opposition also stated that people may not have the same amount of food even after 3 or 4 months, in reference to people who have a lot of food. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens 3 or 4 months in the future is really not something which we should be considering now, because when someone has enough food, which according to that speaker of
I'm gonna
the
wrap
second,
up.
yes, I'm wrapping up with this point. When someone has enough food, which according to the second speaker of the opposition, which will last them to till 3 or 4 months, while other people don't even have enough food for them to make it through the day alive, it is that person's responsibility to ensure the other's right to life. Thank you very much. I'd like to rest my case.
Right, fair enough. Thank you, Ava, and that wraps it up for their proposition, their speech for the speaking for the proposition. That in mind, we will now be moving forward to his teammate, Dhruv Saraf, who should be the final speech for the day. Dhruv Saraf speaking for the opposition. Are you ready?
Yeah. Can I begin?
Yes, you may.
The first speaker said at the very onset of the debate that if you can't feed 100 people, feed one. I absolutely agree with the statement, but feeding the one, if someone chooses not to feed the one, it shouldn't be held as a criminal offense. Good evening to respected chairperson, sir, honorable judges, members of the house, and of course my most worthy opponents. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that today in places where cases of extreme starvation take place, these places are highly, highly magnified. These areas represent either calamity-struck pieces of land or an area where the industries have failed. And ladies and gentlemen, in both these cases, the density of people who have a lot will be very, very low. And to give them the entire burden of feeding malnourished people will be completely outrageous, which is where the first inherent fallacy in this motion arises. Secondly, we today are talking about people who have a lot in this case. As I previously explained, there aren't many people who can fall under this bracket amidst extreme cases of starvation. But still, for argument's sake, let's take away any geographical barriers on these people who have a lot and say that they don't necessarily have to be from the place undergoing such a crisis. Well, in that case, they will have the economic resources required to donate food and water. But let's come to the realistic world and move away from utopia. These people will be focused on the welfare of their surroundings, and to expect them to donate food to these people is a little hopeful. But to criminally charge them if they choose not to is completely detrimental to the nation and society at large. Today's side proposition are advocating for forced charity, but that is not how charity works. Charity is a choice, not a necessity. And to make it one, will be advocating for large-scale chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, today let me familiarize you with a concept called a welfare state. The general response for all questions by side proposition is that making it a criminal offense will give people incentive to come up and donate food. So today, not paying taxes to the government is a criminal offense. Considering how most of the countries tax rich people to use the money to give food to the poor who are largely affected by these cases in extreme cases of starvation, these rich people are already giving taxes. So to make with such a decision, we can't expect someone to make it a criminal offense today, unmake it tomorrow, and then again make it day after tomorrow. That's not how the legislature works. And making it a criminal offense for an undefined amount of time will obviously lead to people who do undergo such crisis being over dependent on people. the second speaker of side proposition called it a moral obligation to give food to the people. I shall call it the same. What I don't see is how carrying through or not carrying through on a moral obligation is a criminal offense in any way, shape, or form in the paradigm that they're proposing. Speakers from the proposition say that the government can't help the poor, so rich people have to take on. In this case, the government, apart from being incompetent, is also becoming oppressive. And is it really sharing when it is forced? Ladies and gentlemen, when rich people are are coerced to give food to them, what will happen is most of them will find some technicality and some loophole to get out of it. And ladies and gentlemen, when you do give food to these people without having a clear mind to do it, that there is no point at all. Bringing out the biggest disparity today, bringing out the biggest disparity in today's debate. Today, the proposition asks us that should the people who aren't capable enough of earning wages left alone to be deserted? Should the people who aren't capable enough of earning wages, who can't buy food for themselves, be deserted? The answer is no. They shouldn't be deserted, and all efforts should be made to help them out. But making it a criminal offense to do something optional is a line which should never be crossed. Which is why, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very, very proud to oppose. And to end, I would just like to end with one quote. You may board the bus of side proposition, but do not let them take you for a ride. Thank you.
Something that Dhruv has often closed by saying in the previous debates. With that, we have wrapped up the speeches.
Suryansh, you're muted.
I apologize. With the quote that Dhruv has very commonly used in our debates, we have now come to the final set of questions after the final speech of today's debate. We will first take a question to the proposition member. We will take the question from Gaurav. Is there a question?
That's a question to the opposition speaker.
Right. Ayush, is this a question to the proposition? I believe Ayush is having network issues. Praneeth, is there a question to...
It is a question to the proposition.
Right.
Hello.
Ayush, go ahead.
Okay, so if you believe that the state has the power to penalize someone for not providing access to its own earned resources, so do you believe that it's the misallocation of resources by the state if they can't provide that food itself, and instead focus on penalizing the population?
So could you please repeat your question? Your voice was
basically
cutting out.
Okay, yeah, sorry for my internet, right? So if basically if the legislature or if a state has the power to penalize somebody for not providing resources, do you believe that it's from their own resources, so do you believe that it's a misallocation of resources by the state to not provide that food and instead focus on penalizing its population?
Sir, in this paradigm, when we're looking at areas of extreme starvation and states which have a significant percentage of citizens which do not have enough food to last them through the day, those states do not have the resources to provide food to their citizens. Those states do not have the logistical resources because those states are politically unstable. If you look at Yemen, there is the port of Al Udeida, through which Yemen is not even able to take in food from international organizations and from a variety of other nations. It's not due to misallocation of resources by the government as you claim it to be. It's because the government doesn't have resources, and also due to the political instability which does not allow the government to distribute those resources. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ava. I hope that answers your question, Ayush. With that, Yashurup or Shomi, do you have a question to the speaker? Fair enough. We'll now be taking a question to side opposition. And at this point, we will take a question from Gaurav and wrap it up.
Right. So, is the opposition speaker insinuating that we should leave the poor people who do not have access to food resources, like to their fate, because the government is not able to provide these people with the resources, and the people and rich people who have the resources, the opposition is not providing them with any incentive to provide these resources. And if he says no to this, and if he says no to the question, what is the what methods does he provide for providing incentive to the rich people to provide resources?
Right.
So first up, I never for once said in my speech that these poor people should be completely deserted and left alone. So that would be going 300 years back and following a theory of the survival of the fittest, which is not what I propose today. So when I say that, I obviously do not discourage the entire concept of charity. I obviously encourage it, and I obviously do say that doing charity is something which is really really good. But making it a criminal offense to not do charity is something which won't work in any paradigm, leave alone the paradigm we live in today. Thank you.
Right, fair enough. Thank you, Dhruv. To wrap it up, Yashrup or Shomi, do you have a question for this final speaker? Fair enough. That in mind, we have come to the end of the speeches and the questions to the debaters today. And before we wrap up, we will give the time to the judges to tabulate their results. And while we do so, we will be taking questions from the audience. And at this point, we would be opening the floor to questions from anyone who would like to. You may turn on your cameras and voice yourselves, if you would like to, that is.
I have a question for Devam.
Right. Do recognize yourself.
Right. So this is Pradyum. So
Right.
Devam, considering the fact that this is a collectively poor society we talk about, and you have spoken about how a lot is relative, a lot in the motion is relative. The rich are not very rich. Don't you think if the not so rich people share food with the poor and income or earning capabilities are not picked up due to lack of education in a very unequal society, everyone will be poor in the long run?
So the context in which I said a lot is relative is because what I am happy with having might not be the same for you. For example, for a fat person, 3 burgers is what he considers as all right, and for a thin person, 2 burgers is what he considers as all right. So for a rich person, understand that he can have three burgers, obviously, when the whole society is having 2 burgers. But what he should not do is buy 4 burgers and have the three and waste the last one. That is what I meant by luxury. Thank you, sir. I hope your answer.
Right. Hopefully that is answered. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Pradyum. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to ask a question to any of our speakers? Do voice yourselves. Is there anyone else with a question? Fair enough. Yashurup and Shomi, have both of you tabulated your results?
Yeah, just give me a minute. Like I've got, I think, 2 columns left, 2 rows left.
Fair enough. All right, the results have been tabulated, but before we do give them out, we would like to hear a few words from Yashurup and Shomi on what they thought about the debate.
Cool, show me. Go first.
Okay, so overall, I'm not going speaker wise. I think it was a decent debate. Just a few things about that came up again and again in the debate, and a few things which could have been done slightly better. As in, all the 4 speakers talked about places like Yemen and talked about places that had. Guys, just stop typing in the chat box, please. It's a huge distraction. Yeah. So everyone talked about Yemen, and everybody talked about places with huge starvation issues, and also talked about why inequality is a problem. But there lacked a coherence in the speech where you had to establish that yes, inequality is the problem in the places, and how the model that is suggested in the motion, or the model that you guys were spending so much time analyzing, was an answer to the problem. Like there was no joining of the dots. There were just points thrown in vacuum as to yes, inequality is a problem, yes, Yemen is a problem, and yeah, we should criminalize not sharing of food. But there were a lot of questions that were unanswered, and you had to really join the dots and show and analyze about how exactly the model that you are suggesting is going to solve the problem, right? You could have also used other examples, like why only Yemen. There are places that suffer from extreme starvation in India, while there are the Ambanis in India at the same time, and show how inequality is the problem. Because Yemen is like at its worst point right now. And it isn't the case that in Yemen there aren't rich people. Like, take for example Sudan and Egypt. Leaders like Omar al-Bashir, who have like exploited the nation, and the system of hierarchy where there are extremely rich people who have like exploited the poor. And there have been disruptive models which the government itself introduced, right? So like talk about how this model is going to solve the problem, and at the same time going to keep a check on such people whom the government is itself incentivizing again, right? So like there needed to be a lot of analyzing instead of like pointing facts that yes, Yemen is a poor country, and yes, Yemen has inequality issues, right? And for side opposition, right, there were so many things which could have been said, right? Things which were brought up but then left as incomplete points. But for it to be an excellent debate, there had to be a coherence in the speeches by the debaters, and it had to be extended even more. For example, uh, when there were points thrown around like arbitrary arrest, and how the government is using as government is like washing its hands off from the responsibilities, right? Yes, these are excellent things, but had to be tied together into a point and said that how a government is actually using it as an escapist strategy. This is like for the other side, and how implementing a law like this is a huge escapist policy, right? And how they're shifting the focus from rather solving the issue at hand to like pointing out people who need to be arrested. And it was, I think, brought up in the later speeches that yeah, people who are rich and people who have resources are anyway going to like escape and find loopholes in the law and like save themselves. So it is again the poor people, uh, maybe someone from the poor who has slightly more resources than the others, who is going to be arrested, and arbitrary arrestments and police violence. So these are issues which are going to make things even worse, right? And how the government should rather take responsibility instead of introducing laws like this. So this is and like secondly, like slippery slope, it was brought up in the speeches by the first and second speakers, but again not extended. Like when you say things like yeah, so having how much food qualifies you as a wealthy person and makes you eligible to be able to share food with others, and point out that it's a slippery slope. Today the government wants me to share food even if it means jeopardizing the health of my family. The next day the government will ask me to share my water. The next day the government will ask me to share my house because other people don't have enough homes. So if this is what the government is going to put its focus on, rather than building more homes, looking into more water supply facilities and creating more resources so that everybody has a full stomach, this running a slippery slope form of regime and this neo-authoritarian regime into like forcing people to share food is not helping and is not a healthy way out. And the government should not be the government should not be able to wash its hands off by like simply like targeting the people who are already in a crisis situation. So I think these were some of the important points which only came up in the debate but were left incomplete, and it would have been an even better debate if these points would have been extended and elaborated and like joined together and tied into a proper, complete and crisp point. So I think that is all I want to say. And there were a lot of things, a lot of fresh perspectives brought into the debate, and a lot of things, a lot of good points into the debate. And that is all I had to say.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for closing those gaps over there. Show me. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to Yashurup before we move on to any results. Yashurup, go ahead.
Yeah, guys, I won't speak about the debate too much because I think Shomi did that. But in general, whenever you guys approach, and we've all had this problem, whenever you guys approach a motion, right, you tend to look at it from the structures that already exist in the world, which is like a pointless thing to do, right? So this motion, you're looking at it as, okay, arbitrary arrest, it's against the law, etc. That's not how you debate. Imagine you live in a world where no laws exist. Imagine there are no countries, there are no states, there are no governments. There is no concept of India, Yemen, you or I, right? You live at like a medieval, like pre-utopic society, etc., where there are no rules. You are just philosophizing on these things. You don't know how you'll do them, right? You just know that you want to reach a stage where you do these things, right? That's how you debate, where you don't have to debate about how it will be done. what law will be passed, because these are pointless. You all are what, in class 10 and 12 or 11, whatever. No one's asking you to come up with the laws. People who come up with laws can't come up with laws well enough, right? So it's not your burden to do that. Having said that, understand that when you do debates such as these, right, you have to draw parallels from the real world. So when a debate motion talks about something like food, it's not just about food. Food is a proxy for resources that save people's lives, right? So that can be money, that can be shelter, that can be clothing, that can be healthcare, right? So for the proposition, for example, right, ask yourself, is this debate different from any progressive taxation debate? No, it's not, right? But the progressive taxation debate we all know about. Progressive tax systems exist. As for the opposition, ask yourself, is this a debate where, like, it's a post Russian revolution, early Soviet Union debate where you take over from people who had too much and you kill them off, and you distribute everything else and you justify it in the name of a crime? So for opposition, how far can governments go? Are we bad people? Are we good people? These are questions you need to ask. The opposition can take a cynical stance and say, you know what, like, people are fucked up. People are inherently shit, and that's okay, right? In a world where people are shit, let them be shit. We can't expect people to have the moral compass to do these things, right? So we will go out of our way and do it. And if people die, they die. Too fucking bad. You are allowed to make arguments like, let people die. You are allowed to make arguments like, you know what, like, people are bad. Charity maybe is not a good thing at all, right? You are allowed to say that charity, like, so one day, like today, if I have extra and you force me to share it with someone, you are giving me the opportunity to have a bit of a power over that person, right? Because now I'm the savior. You can easily come up and say that, you know what, it's better that person go to less meals a day, as opposed to have you become a moral savior for them, right? These are all fine arguments to make, right? So think about this, break out of the existing forms of nation state laws, what rich means, what poor means. Say your own damn thing. Assume like you're creating the world and this is your own philosophical perspective, and then go at it, and then add the fluff later on. So yeah, that's about it. Oh, finally, never debate the motions wording. That is the stupidest thing anyone can do in any debate, right? Understand what the semantics of a motion are. When a motion says, for example, this house will paint all chairs blue, it's never a debate about who will paint the chairs and what color of blue will be used, right? Get into you guys are not in class 6 or 7. Get into the subtext of things, like, in a wording, worded motion like this, it's not about who will change the law. It's not about what the law will become. It's not about how, like, the word extra was used or the word charity was used. These are semantics. This will get you nowhere. Never debate the wording of a motion. It's a waste of time. But yeah, that's about it.
Fair enough. That was some very valuable advice, Yashrup. Thank you very much. I hope all the speakers were receptive to it. That in mind, there's nothing else left for me to say. I think Yashrup and Shomi covered it best. That in mind, we would now be, before we move on to the final results about the teams that have won the debate, and we will be taking a poll on whether the motion proposed has been carried or not. So in front of your screen, there is now a vote, which you can now make your opinion felt and decide whether the opposite side proposition has carried the debate or opposition. Right, we need a few more votes. Yashrup and Shomi, you are allowed to vote. So if you want to, go ahead. Right, we'll wait for a minute more because we have a few more votes to come in. Right, we have a very contested poll, so to speak. And with every vote having been tallied, we have come to the end, and the results are with a 90s, with a very close margin actually, with a 51 to 49 gap. The side proposition has carried the debate. So congratulations to the side if you want to take that home with you. And we will now be announcing the teams that have won, and as well as the speakers. So we will start with the runner-up speaker, I would request Shomi or Yasharup to announce the best speaker and the runner-up.
Show me, just go for it. Do them all.
Just a second.
Right. Shomi.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can announce the speakers.
So the runner for the best speaker position is Avyar from Teams NA. And do I announce the best speaker as well?
Yeah, go for it.
Surprisingly, best speaker is his teammate Dhruv.
Congratulations to the duo. Some very good speeches from them, evidently. So they have made a sweep of the awards, and I think we've given away one of the awards already for the teams. And that in mind, we would now be moving forward with the team awards. Over to Yasharup. Go ahead and announce the third, second, and first in this debate.
Guys, I think the third is 1 second. Let me just check this.
Yeah, the
Right.
third isn't mentioned. We have to
No,
calculate.
but just look at the tally, right? The third on my sheet is those guys, and the third on your sheet is those
It's
guys.
been tabulated. I've put that in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1 second. Yeah, guys. So the third is dialect duo. The second is losers, and the first is not applicable.
Congratulations to all three teams, and to the team of Z speakers. Do not be disheartened. It was a very close. It was a very closely matched marking. So it's nothing to be disheartened about. That in mind, we have come to the very end. Thank you, all of you, for participating and making it so far. Thank you very much, Yasharup and Shomi, for taking out some time from your day to join in and judge. And congratulations to Not Applicable for coming off with the victory. They have had the Best Speaker Award in all of their debates, except they have had the Best Speaker Award in all of their debates. So they have been very consistent throughout the tournament. And we wish all of you the best of luck after, and to all, and afterwards, even if you're disheartened over the fact that you won first or second or third, I remind you that there will be much more debates after this one in the future on this very platform, if not others. So I do hope I can see your faces once again, and request you to keep your head held high. And is there anything you guys would like to say before we wrap up? Right, fair enough. Then in that case, thank you guys for joining in. That's what that was, and we'll see you on the next one.